Hi, I'm Siobhan Richardson. My pronouns are she, her. I'm going to be talking to you today about joyful workspaces. And what that means is cultivating your own workspace practices, connecting with other folks, making workspace agreements. And the goal is ultimately to together set up workspaces in which we feel like we can let fly and create. First thing is to recognize what kind of space are we working in. Today I'll be talking to you mostly about curating our digital shared space as opposed to our in-person space. And the difference is this: when we're working in person together, one person or one group of people has a lot of influence over how that space is set up. So the space that we're gathering in is maybe tidied in a particular way, it's set up in a particular way, maybe there is food and water available, maybe there isn't, but there's a lot of influence one can have over how that physical space actually sets up how we work together. When we are working digitally, we are all in separate spaces. So the task of curating that work experience falls on each individual. And because it's not coming out of like one person or a fewer number of people's brains, that is something that we can communicate about ahead of time, particularly if we're looking to support a particular kind of work environment. And along with that, and this applies to any workspace, it can be helpful to discuss ahead of time what for each of us sets up a workspace that we are excited to work in, that we will be engaged to work in. I'm going to use the word context quite a bit. I find it super helpful. So in this moment, we're thinking about the difference between our social context and our workspace context, and what is the difference in our workspace context when we are kind of socializing together, and when we are crafting together, that's when we're talking about the work, and when we are in the art space together, that's like when we are the work itself. So those are the words that I use to define it: social work, or work social, because sometimes it's a bit of a slash situation, as well as the craft space and the art space. It's helpful to define these contexts because our roles, our relationships with each other, power dynamics within those relationships, those all shift a bit depending on that context. So an awareness of the fact that we slide in and out of these contexts when we are working together helps us to, again, curate our space, to define what our roles are, and also to get a clearer sense of how do I support myself in that work and how do I support the people around me. It's helpful to have practices together that recognize when we are shifting contexts. When we're in physical space together, that can be fairly easy. We go from sitting down together at chairs and tables and then actually moving into physical space. We may very well have subconscious practices that we already do, like we're talking together here, I go over to my bag and do something, I get a drink of water, and then I come back into the workspace. So we do have these things that we do physically. When we are digital, we're so often kind of stuck in front of our cameras, like within the frame somehow. So when we're shifting from socializing to working together, when we're shifting from talking about the work to actually trying out a piece together, it could be helpful for us to recognize that transition. So that might be some kind of repeatable physical gesture. Maybe I walk around in a circle in my space. Maybe I step away. Maybe I go off camera even, and I do a little shake. And then I come back into the space. Maybe I don't have space to move around in. Maybe I'm sitting on my bed and doing my work. So something I can do is then take my hand, cover my camera, give myself a moment while I've covered my camera. Let's pretend I've covered my camera. Take a breath in and out. Maybe a shake, some other physical gesture, and then uncover my camera and come back into space. It doesn't seem like much. I know it seems like maybe it's just some kind of physical gesture, but we do know from many practices that a physical gesture is actually really helpful for us. I mean, you know when you forget your keys or something, so you go to the next room to get them, and once you get there, you realize, why am I here? You're not sure why you have forgotten what's going on. And part of that is because your brain recognizes passing through thresholds as almost a separate reality. So we're kind of hacking that natural thing that happens and helping us to use that to establish that sense of changing from one space to another. And why this is helpful is because the body budgets energy. The body thinks about, and your body and mind perceives what might be coming up, stocks away enough energy for that, and then might correct any prediction errors that it makes. But if continually you are leaving your body in a state of being in a heightened context, let's say you don't quite step away from the work and you're in a bit of a heightened state, then your body and brain start to learn that this workday takes a lot of energy. And yes, it does, but we can use these little moments of bracketing, this little bit of closure, this little bit of tagging in and tagging out of the work to help our minds and bodies go, oh, I need to be heightened for this amount of time, and then I can let it go. It's one way that helps each individual to manage their body budget. And it also means that it creates that mindful separation between one context and another, so that, whether it's a written list or just something subconscious, we can understand and know that we are stepping into a different context and know that our power dynamics have changed, our relationships have changed. And that's why it's so important to take breaks. I, for one, am kind of terrible at taking breaks, but the better I've gotten at taking those breaks and not working on my break, the more energy and brain power I actually have. So recognizing context and giving ourselves a tag in and tag out, or a bracket, some manner of closure around those different contexts, can really help within the work itself. Outside the work, bracketing or tagging in and tagging out can help to separate our workspace from our living space, even if it's just symbolically. And this is a really big support for your home life, for your relaxation time, for your sleep hygiene, especially if you are in a situation where maybe the only place for you to be alone is to sit on your bed, which is the same place you sleep, the same place you work. Your brain has a hard time with that. So using closure practices, some kind of bracketing, can help to create an actual transition for you. And that might be any way that you engage the senses, engage the mind. So maybe it's some manner of scent, maybe it's aromatherapy, maybe it's something you do visually, maybe it is that like walking in and out of the room and you like mindfully say to yourself, I'm going to change the lighting. Maybe you have the opportunity to change how the lights are set up so that when you step into your room again, it is now recognizable as your workspace. This is a helpful transition to, again, separate your workspace from your home space. This kind of functions as a commute does, in that it's a time that separates those two bits, and your brain has a chance to transition between the two. Speaking of transitions, we can further assist this idea of commute by having a shared transition time. One version of that is to have the digital room open maybe 10 to 15 minutes ahead of time and encourage folks to log on, turn on their cameras and their audio, or in whatever way you are engaging. But there's no obligation to like suddenly be on and ready. But it can create some of that, like that gentle drifting in that we do when we're in physical space together. So there can be a kind of casual connection before that moment where we're meant to be on and ready. And when that moment of on and ready comes, maybe there's a particular check-in ritual that you have. A check-in is a really good idea. It's part of our communication, which we're going to talk about a little bit more thoroughly in a moment. But it can begin that way of finding out, like, I'm a person, you're a person. Let's connect as genuine human beings, because we don't have that casual chat time in the same way. It can also be a great moment to check in on any accessibility needs that anybody has, any extenuating circumstances, like, we've got construction going on today. You might hear some ding, ding, ding going on my audio. I need frequent access to the bathroom today. Whatever anybody's needs are, so we can check in, and that way we know that we're already connecting as people outside of the work itself, easing that transition and giving us an easier way to start together. You can also do the same thing drifting away, in that the work is done now. The room is going to stay open for a bit, but we are officially closed. Feel free to hang out together and check in. Before we go too far, I want to talk about communication. None of this works without communication. And part of that is simply saying, maybe it's, I don't know what I need yet, and we'll communicate about it later. But the big thing is to recognize that as we talk with each other, it is a bit of a work in progress. It takes a lot of listening. It takes a lot of, certitude and tactfulness. But being clear about what you perceive your needs to be in that moment and at that time. As much as you can, you want to front load anything, like maybe establishing how frequently you'll need breaks, or when are your available windows, because it's between this time and this time that people are not around, or where there are lots of people around. Stating some of those needs as early as possible can be uncomfortable for some folks. There may be a sense of how that might create conflict, but generally speaking, the more we can state those needs, the more we can integrate them into our work together, and the more we practice stating our needs and having those met, and having those met or exceeded, I hope, can help to establish, again, a more joyful workspace, everyone together. And remember that all this has to be in conjunction with any of the anti-oppression work that you're doing, and really focusing on listening and seeing what you can do to support each other as a group when you are working together. Speaking of communicating your needs, remember that that includes the privacy of the space that you're in, to whatever degree is available to you when you're working in a digital workspace. So just as we want to communicate our needs to the people we're working with, can some of those needs be communicated with the people in your own space, insofar as these are the hours that I expect to be rehearsing? Can we discuss noise levels at that time? Or maybe it's also asking the folks around you, when are they busiest or when are they least busy, as an example, and then seeing how the group you're working with can integrate into that. It's a lot of people, it's a lot of management, so in some ways I know it feels a bit unrealistic. But at the very least, can there be some conversations around what will help support your work? Maybe it is one particular session where you know that there will be more deep emotional work, or you're looking to do something particularly vulnerable. Hopefully that communication and the curating of your space includes communicating with the people around you, not just with arranging the things about you. In the timeline of our imaginary rehearsal together, we are now at the point where we are now working together. And something that happens to us when we are online is we have this sense of being on camera. We have a sense of being on. And facilitators in particular can sometimes have this feeling that we're meant to provide entertainment, as opposed to being a facilitator for engagement. And once I made that switch in my head, it really helped me to just get more grounded in reminding myself what I'm here to do. And remember that dead air or empty space where no one's talking feels a bit different in digital engagement than it does in space. So all this to say, remember that communicating and engaging digitally feels really different than in person. And if you've been doing a lot of digital engagement, when you move to being in person together, it's a bit of a thing, as your mind kind of shifts back into being in space with people again. And communication is one of the reasons why, just how we communicate and the timing of it. So the suggestion here is, first of all, remember that we can have space where no one's talking, and it's going to feel longer than it usually does when you're physically in space together. Also, remembering that our task together is to engage with each other and not necessarily to entertain. And that may be sort of a subconscious thing, but once you start focusing on it, you may find that this one helps you out quite a bit. And there are other ways to engage as well. I think, again, we get a little bit focused on like the video chat medium, but I've also had some great success in times working together where we engage different kinds of engagement at the same time. So we've got our video chat, we've got maybe a text chat that's built into it. There's also sometimes being engaged vocally and not necessarily looking at the camera and looking at our monitor space. There's also external collaboration tools, things like Jamboard, using Google Docs or other kind of collaborative software can help to have that sense of a fuller engagement of the whole person through different mediums. And then don't forget, make use of your frame. This is a favorite one of mine, is if you do have the ability to use any space, even if it's just my arm's length, because you can see just how far back that actually feels like it is. I tend to think of all the windows as little TARDISes, as it were. That's a reference to Doctor Who, where each window, as it were, is an ability and the invitation to be present with someone in their space. So like right now, you're joining me in my space. And it's tempting to think of it as just like this flat plane, but can remember that we go this far back and this far across. And again, even if this is where I am and I'm sitting maybe on my bed and that's all I've got, I can still lean left and right. I can maybe lie back and stretch. See how you can maximize your own physical space as a way of feeling more engaged with yourself, which will in turn help you feel more engaged with the people through the sci-fi window. Let's talk a little bit further about eye line and eye contact. So with this idea of like engaging your own physical space, remember that we tend to feel like we have to stay engaged with the camera and with the monitors. So some people will be really focused on wherever their camera is, or they'll be focused a lot on where their monitor is as a way to stay engaged. Now, depending on how you access the connection with other folks, some of these ideas will work for you and some won't. But remember that, especially if we're doing like a long rehearsal period, it may not actually be necessary to stay engaged visually through the camera at all times, or whatever method is your usual connection with the other folks. Are there opportunities where I can turn away from the camera and mindfully engage in my own physical space? If it's audio, can I change the speaker? Is that an option? Can it come out of the device? Can I be wearing headphones? Can I wear one headphone and not two? Little ways of shaking up the engagement with the stream, as it were, can help you to be engaged in your own space and in your own body. If we continue along the eye line or the eye contact way, once we're actually, let's say we're working on a drama piece and we're acting, we can choose the time when I am fully engaged either in the camera or on my monitor. We can also choose the time that maybe I'm not looking at this at all. I'm not really worried about this at all. Maybe I have, my favorite is stuffed animals. Maybe I have a stuffed animal over here that's acting as my scene partner for that moment. Depending on the focus of our time together, we can choose alternate ways to create the engagement with the story or with the purpose of our gathering, so that we're able to, again, engage the whole person rather than being a little bit focused on the device. One of the reasons we have video fatigue is because when we engage through the device, it changes the way we usually socialize and some of the cues that we use. So one of the solutions is to like disengage entirely when possible. Let's pop back again just a little bit to this idea of needing to provide entertainment. And what I am focusing on at this moment is like the curating of the visual field. I think there are times when we think we need to have a perfect backdrop. But when we're working together, when we're collaborating together, that's not always necessary. What I might suggest is, rather than a perfect slick backdrop, is having a sense of how you're curating the visual field that folks are experiencing. And that can take many forms. In this case, I've like balanced my background and I'm wearing a color that helps me to stand out from that background, but that doesn't necessarily have to happen. I mean, maybe I've got it turned this way and you can see there's a lot more going on there. There's some shape. I could choose to be here a little bit off to the side. Maybe we'll do that. There you go. So I'm a little bit off to the side, but there's still a bit of the space that frames me a bit. Or maybe even I go here. I'm gonna go a little shorter. Yeah, so maybe I'm here so that the background actually still kind of points towards me. Why I mention this is that sometimes there's quite a bit of stress around, well, how does my background look? What does that say? And I think the important part really is, how do you inhabit your background? How do you populate your frame, if that's something you would like to play with? But really, how are you supporting yourself in showing up in the space? I just wanted to make sure we took a little bit of a moment to talk about like what's behind you. Similarly, we can talk about what's in front of you. And what I mean by that is, what is the visual field behind your camera? If you have the ability to change up what that is, what I might suggest is, as a general guideline, hopefully it's devoid of your to-do list, as it were. If we have things in front of us that tell us this is what's coming up next, or other things that can distract you from the work at hand, that can take quite a toll as your brain tries to separate or live in those two places at once. So sometimes it's as simple as, is there some kind of like, can you put your camera next to a wall so you're looking at a wall? Is it an opportunity to tidy up that thing you've always wanted to tidy up? Something else though that's helpful to be in our visual field is what I call a beacon. A beacon is anything that symbolizes the reason that we are gathering together. And we can arrive at that in many ways. Maybe it's something that we do in an early part of the process where each person finds a symbol for themselves. If you're a visual artist, maybe it's something that you draw. Maybe it's a piece of music. Maybe it's something that is arrived on as a group, and then we find a way to distribute that item or something like that item to each person. And that's something that can be in our visual field. So for instance, in theater, whenever we are a little bit astray at some point, we think about, go back to the story. What does the story need? And I think this is the idea of the beacon. What's behind the beacon is whenever we feel ourselves going astray, whether that's in our workplace, whether that's in the work itself, sometimes the beacon can help to ground you, kind of like a lighthouse, bringing you back to a sense of groundedness of your person and groundedness of the work that we're doing together. Let's talk about some really practical considerations. We know that the body affects the mind affects the body. So make sure that time is made for bio breaks, that you're eating well for you, that you're getting enough water, that you are stepping away from the workspace. Plan bathroom breaks. I mean, these are all things that we know, but it deserves to be said because the strain on us working in a digital space now that you're responsible for your own space as well as the shared space in a different way than you were before, the strain on the mind is different. And we don't always have the discernment to know, like, why am I not feeling great? There are lots of reasons to feel uncomfortable. I need a bathroom break and I haven't figured that out. I have not been drinking enough water. Ooh, that's a common one. I haven't been sleeping well because suddenly I am, or newly or continually, I am working in the same place that I am living. There's lots of reasons why the body might be upset. Am I feeling uncomfortable because this material is more disturbing than I thought it would be? Am I having a mental health day, particularly if you are watching this still in the midst of the pandemic, when the stressors and the strains on us all are far different than we ever thought that we might have to approach in our workday. So I just wanted to make sure we took a moment to recognize that whatever efforts we have in our communication with each other, in our curating of our space, we must always still remember to look inward and take care of your body and your mind at the same time. Another source of potential discomfort is how communication is really different in a digital space than it is in a physical space. So when we're in a physical space, we have all those moments where we chat with each other as we pass, we make eye contact, and we connect in all sorts of nonverbal ways, which we don't really have the same kind of opportunity in a digital space, particularly if it's a space with more than two people in it. We don't have that incidental connecting time. So as a way to support community, as a way to support the wellness of our social community, some things that can be set up are things like a Discord channel, maybe a separate WhatsApp chat where people can send audio, like a vocal note to each other, or we can send text messages. This helps to have that additional social connection, and sometimes you just kind of need to mull over some thoughts about your workplace together with other folks who are there as well. We also don't have that sort of incidental time where we might figure out some small conflicts. So it's really important when we're working digitally to also take a look at how we are managing our problems and conflicts. Look up constructive conflict or positive conflict. There's lots of resources out there on ways to take a look at how we're not working well together, and then how we can transform that into better ways to work with each other. And remember, as a source of inspiration, that the more difficulty we have in figuring these things out, generally, the better solutions we come up with it in the end. So it's a sign of good growth and good work. So now in the imaginary timeline of us working together, we have come to the end of that work day. This is a reminder to again do some kind of tag out, some kind of bracketing practice. And that can include a group practice, a group check-in, check-out as it were. But also remember that some kind of commute for yourself, some kind of tagging out, some kind of closure, some version of putting the work away and leaving it away. Engage your senses, engage your mind, or maybe disengage your mind insofar as perhaps it's meditation or going for a walk. I have heard of people literally going on a walk, a commute of a walk around the block. All of these little tricks can help the brain to transition from one thing to another, give your mind some time to process what has happened in that day. And then, again, a repeat, is there an opportunity for social interaction with the people you've been working with? Is it something about that? Will something about that feed you and fill you insofar as creating a social connection with the people that you're working with, if that is supportive to your process? And finally, I hope that some of these tips with regard to curating your space, curating your shared space, communicating, being clear to your needs as much as you can, and giving yourself some time to enter the work and step away from the work, finding time to socialize when appropriate for you. Hopefully this will support your process, whether digital or in person, because I think digital collaboration is not going away anytime soon. And one more word of support. Remember that if you have been working digitally for some time, the transition into a physical space together again is going to take some energy. Your body will need to budget for it. So be kind with yourself. Give yourself some space. Give yourself some extra time to fill the proverbial well and to take your rest. So thank you for being here with me today. I hope that this has been helpful for you, and I look forward to possibly working with you.